in the heart of a bustling city. Behind the polished glass doors of a prestigious bank, one decision would ripple further than anyone could imagine. A young black man walked in that morning, carrying not just a file of documents but a lifetime of dreams and determination. To him, this meeting was supposed to be the first step toward building something greater than himself. But to the banker, seated across from him, dressed in arrogance stitched tighter than his suit, it was nothing more than an opportunity to dismiss, to belittle, to remind someone of where society thought they belonged. With a smirk, the banker leaned back and delivered the words like a sentence. "You're too broke for a loan." The room went quiet, the humiliation loud enough to echo in the young man's chest. Others in line glanced over, some pitying, some amused, as if rejection were entertainment. But what no one knew, what not even the banker realized, was that the man standing before him had something the system could never quantify: resilience, ingenuity, and a truth that would unravel every smug assumption in that office. By the time the story reached its climax, the same banker who laughed would be silenced in the most public, humiliating way possible. The city pulsed with the rhythm of ambition, its skyline a jagged line of glass and steel that glittered in the sunlight like trophies reserved only for the chosen few. To the casual eye, it was a place where opportunity lived on every corner, where success was promised to anyone bold enough to chase it. But for Marcus Johnson, every street he walked reminded him of how unevenly the rules of the game were written. Marcus was 32, tall and lean, with a quiet strength about him that drew people in. His life had been a series of battles, most unseen, most unacknowledged. He was the son of a single mother who had worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, a woman who taught him to stand tall even when the world tried to press him down. From a young age, Marcus had learned that survival wasn't just about money. It was about persistence, dignity, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow could be different. He was no stranger to hard work. His hands bore the calluses of labor, construction, warehouse shifts, delivery routes, but his mind held a vision far greater. For years, Marcus had nurtured an idea: a community-based logistics company designed to give people from overlooked neighborhoods jobs, fair pay, and a sense of pride. It wasn't just about profit. It was about legacy, about rewriting the narrative that people like him were destined only to struggle. But to build his vision, Marcus needed funding. He had spent months gathering research, drafting plans, attending workshops at the community center, and consulting mentors who believed in him. His documents were impeccable: financial forecasts, growth strategies, and a clear outline of how his company would thrive. On paper, he was everything a bank should want in a client. Yet Marcus knew that the world often cared less about paper and more about perception. Still, he believed. He pressed his best suit, one that wasn't new but carefully kept. He polished his shoes until they caught the light. He tucked his business plan into a sleek black folder, the kind that symbolized professionalism, authority, seriousness. Standing in front of the mirror that morning, he repeated the mantra his mother had drilled into him since childhood: "You belong in every room you walk into." The bank itself was an imposing figure on the corner of 5th and Madison, its towering columns and gleaming marble floors designed to intimidate. Inside, everything whispered wealth: polished brass rails, chandeliers dripping with crystal, soft leather chairs that looked too expensive to sit on. Marcus felt the weight of eyes on him as soon as he entered, as though the staff and customers alike had already decided he didn't belong there. He kept his head high, though, clutching his folder like armor. The banker he was scheduled to meet was Richard Halston, a man whose name carried power in the financial district. Halston was known for being sharp, ruthless, and impeccably dressed, the type of man who measured success not by impact but by the thickness of his clients' wallets. He was also known for a smug smile that appeared whenever he dismissed someone who didn't fit his ideal of wealth. Marcus had waited weeks for this appointment. As he approached the receptionist's desk, he introduced himself with calm confidence. "I have a 10 appointment with Mr. Halston." The receptionist glanced at him, her eyes flicking briefly to his suit, then to the folder in his hands, before she offered a polite but thin smile. "Please have a seat." He'll call you shortly." Marcus settled into one of the plush chairs, the ticking of the grand clock in the lobby magnifying every second. Around him, men in tailored suits spoke in hushed tones about stocks, investments, mergers. Women in designer heels clutched handbags that cost more than his car. He felt the sting of difference, but he refused to shrink. He reminded himself, "Your idea is solid. Your work is valid. Your presence matters." When the receptionist finally led him to Halston's office, Marcus stepped into a world of luxury. The office stretched wide, its walls lined with shelves of leather-bound books and trophies of business accolades. Behind the massive oak desk sat Halston himself, his salt-and-pepper hair perfectly combed, his suit cut to precision. He didn't rise to greet Marcus, only gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Mr. Johnson, is it?" Halston's voice was smooth but carried the sharpness of someone who had already made up his mind. "Yes," Marcus replied, sitting tall. "Thank you for seeing me today." Halston adjusted his cufflinks, glanced briefly at the folder Marcus placed on the desk, and then leaned back with that familiar smirk. In that instant, Marcus felt it, the silent judgment, the invisible wall being built before he'd even spoken. Marcus began his presentation with calm clarity, outlining his vision for the logistics company. He spoke about underserved neighborhoods, about untapped talent, about bridging economic divides while still generating strong returns. He explained his research, his market analysis, his growth projections. Every word was measured, professional, convincing. Yet, as he spoke, Halston barely looked at the documents. He tapped his pen against the desk, occasionally glancing at Marcus as though humoring him. When Marcus finished, the silence that followed felt heavier than the marble floors downstairs. Finally, Halston leaned forward, his smirk deepening. "Mr. Johnson, let me stop you there." Marcus braced himself. "You're too broke for a loan." The words dropped like stones. Cold. Final. Dismissive. Halston didn't even bother with politeness. Didn't say your credit history doesn't qualify, or your collateral isn't sufficient. He stripped away all professionalism and left only cruelty. Marcus sat frozen for a moment, the humiliation sharp in his chest. He thought of his mother, of the long nights he'd spent drafting plans, of the community waiting for opportunities. He thought of how every polished word, every careful gesture, every ounce of preparation had been crushed in a second. Halston leaned back, satisfaction flickering in his eyes, as though rejecting Marcus wasn't business but entertainment. "Try again when you're more established," he added casually, already reaching for the next file on his desk. Marcus rose slowly, his grip tightening on the folder. The sting of rejection was painful, but beneath it was something stronger, an ember of resolve that Halston hadn't extinguished. He walked out of the office, his steps steady, though his heart thundered. In the lobby, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished marble. He didn't look like a failure. He looked like a man who had been underestimated for the last time. That night, as the city buzzed with life, Marcus returned to his modest apartment. He spread his documents across the kitchen table, the words of the banker still echoing in his mind. "You're too broke for a loan." But instead of breaking him, the insult ignited him. What Halston didn't realize, what no banker could measure, was Marcus's capacity to adapt. He began researching alternative funding options, community investors, grants, angel networks that supported minority entrepreneurs. He reached out to local business owners who had started small and grown through perseverance. Each conversation added fuel to his fire. Halston thought he had silenced Marcus, but he had only set the stage for something far greater. And when the moment came for Marcus's success to rise in public view, the same banker who smirked at him would have no choice but to face his own humiliation. The sting of Halston's words lingered long after Marcus left the bank. The marble lobby, the whispered stares, the smug satisfaction etched into the banker's face, all of it replayed in his mind like a cruel loop. Walking back into the city's rush of honking cars and hurried footsteps, Marcus felt the weight of two worlds pressing on him, the one that told him no, and the one inside him that whispered not yet. That night, In his modest apartment, Marcus cleared the kitchen table. He laid out his documents: business forecasts, community plans, maps of neighborhoods that had been neglected for too long. The rejection letter from another bank lay beside them, the inked words polite but equally dismissive. And now Halston's cruel dismissal echoed above them all. "You're too broke for a loan." But Marcus refused to see the end of the road. Instead, he saw a fork. One path was defeat, the easier route. The other was perseverance, filled with uncertainty, sleepless nights, and countless setbacks. Marcus chose the second without hesitation. He began researching alternative funding options. While other men his age spent nights scrolling through entertainment, Marcus spent hours combing through online databases, financial literacy forums, and entrepreneurship networks. He learned about grants for minority-owned businesses, nonprofit initiatives, and angel investors who sought vision rather than collateral. At the local library, the librarians knew his face well. He became a fixture at the long oak tables, his laptop open, piles of reference books beside him. He filled notebooks with strategies, grant deadlines, and contact lists. His determination burned brighter with every hour spent there. But determination didn't pay bills. By day, Marcus continued working at the warehouse, lifting heavy boxes, sweat dripping from his brow. His coworkers often laughed when they saw him scribbling notes during lunch breaks. "You really think you're going to start a company, man?" one of them asked, half amused, half doubtful. Marcus only smiled, never explaining the depth of his vision. Every dollar he earned was carefully divided: rent, groceries, and then savings. He skipped luxuries others took for granted. No streaming subscriptions, no eating out, no new clothes. His life was pared down to essentials and dreams. Seeds of belief. One evening, Marcus attended a small business networking event at the community center. The room buzzed with chatter, local entrepreneurs swapping cards, sharing ideas. Marcus, in his modest suit, felt out of place at first. But when he explained his vision for a community-based logistics company, something shifted. People listened. An older woman, owner of a local grocery store, nodded thoughtfully. "You're talking about a business that doesn't just make money but builds people," she said. "That's rare these days." Another man who ran a car repair shop offered encouragement. "Banks don't always see potential, brother, but we do. Keep pushing." Their words weren't loans or checks, but they were something just as valuable: validation. For the first time since Halston's rejection, Marcus felt that others could see the fire he carried. First setback encouraged, Marcus applied for several grants and microloans. Weeks passed, each day filled with anticipation. But the responses, when they came, were familiar. Rejections. Polite phrases like "limited funding this year" or "not the right fit." Each letter was another weight pressing on his chest. One particularly harsh email read, "Your lack of assets and established income disqualifies you from consideration." Marcus closed his laptop that night, his shoulders slumping. The memory of Halston's smirk returned, sharper than ever. Doubt crept in. Maybe he was reaching too high. Maybe the world wasn't ready to give someone like him a chance. He stared at the ceiling in the dark, hearing his mother's voice in memory. "You belong in every room you walk into." The next morning, he rose early, exhausted but unwilling to quit. Rejection hurt, but surrender would hurt worse. Unexpected ally one afternoon. While running a delivery shift to make extra cash, Marcus struck up a conversation with a client, a middle-aged black entrepreneur named Samuel Green. Green ran a small but successful chain of local moving companies. He noticed Marcus's curiosity as they talked about logistics. "You sound like you've thought this through," Green said. "I have," Marcus replied cautiously, "but banks don't see it." Green studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Banks didn't see me either years ago, but I started small. One truck, one client, and a whole lot of stubbornness. Now look," he gave Marcus his card. "All me. I can't promise funding, but maybe I can share some wisdom." That card felt like gold in Marcus's hand. Over the next weeks, Green became a mentor. He explained the pitfalls of logistics, the importance of trust in community business, and the strategies to grow without heavy capital. "Don't think you need $1,000,000 to start," Green advised. "Think of what you can do with 100, with 1,000. Then multiply. Building brick by brick, taking." Green's advice, Marcus scaled back his plans. Instead of waiting for a massive loan, he started smaller. He pooled together his savings, bought second-hand equipment, and offered freelance delivery services to local businesses. It wasn't the grand launch he had envisioned, but it was movement. He worked long hours, warehouse shifts by day, delivery routes by night. His car, though old, became his first company vehicle. His first clients were modest shops and small grocers, people who trusted him because of his reliability. Word spread slowly. Each satisfied client referred another. The work was grueling, but it gave Marcus more than income. It gave him proof. Proof that his idea was viable. Proof that he didn't need Halston or his bank to validate him. Growing tension, but growth came with challenges. Competition was fierce. Bigger companies with more resources dominated the market. Some clients wavered, tempted by the promises of established names. Marcus often returned home bone-tired, his hands aching, wondering how much longer he could sustain the grind alone. Yet every setback fueled him further. Each time he passed the bank where Halston had humiliated him, Marcus felt a silent vow form in his chest. "One day, you'll know my name." He began documenting everything: invoices, contracts, client feedback, carefully organizing them into binders. He wanted evidence, not just dreams. Evidence that when the day came, no one could dismiss him again. The turning point. Months later, a local newspaper ran a feature on small businesses making a difference in underserved neighborhoods. Marcus's company was highlighted, praised for creating opportunities and reliability where others overlooked. The article caught attention. Suddenly, calls began coming in from larger clients. A nonprofit organization needed consistent deliveries. A school district sought affordable transport for supplies. Marcus's once small operation started gaining momentum. The recognition lifted him, but it also brought new pressure. He needed to expand quickly to keep up with demand. More trucks, more staff, more capital, and that meant returning to the very world that had once dismissed him. Back to the lion's den. With new confidence and tangible proof of his business's growth, Marcus decided to approach investors again. But this time, he wasn't just a dreamer with a folder of ideas. He was a business owner with clients, contracts, and results. His mentor, Green, encouraged him. "Walk in like you've already won, because in many ways, you have." Marcus scheduled another appointment at the same bank with the same Richard Halston. The memory of that office, of those cruel words, lingered as he prepared. But this time, Marcus wasn't seeking approval. He was bringing undeniable truth. What he didn't know was that fate was setting the stage for a public confrontation, one that would not only silence Halston's arrogance but turn Marcus's humiliation into a triumph witnessed by many. The air inside the bank felt colder than Marcus remembered. But this time he didn't arrive with trembling hands or a heart heavy with doubt. He walked through the glass doors with a quiet strength, wearing the same suit that once felt like armor, but now sat on him like a crown. In his briefcase, neatly organized, were contracts, invoices, press features, and testimonials. Proof. The receptionist gave him the same rehearsed smile as before, but her eyes flickered with curiosity when she saw the confidence in his stride. Marcus requested an appointment with Richard Halston, and moments later the banker emerged from his office. Halston's expression barely concealed his disdain. "You again," he muttered as though Marcus's presence was an inconvenience. "I trust you've finally come to accept reality." But Marcus didn't flinch. He simply followed Halston into the office where his humiliation had once taken place. The polished wood, the leather chairs, the gold-trimmed certificates on the wall, nothing had changed. But Marcus had. Halston leaned back, smirking. "Let me guess. You've realized this. Dream of yours isn't sustainable." Marcus calmly placed the stack of documents on the desk. Actually, I came to show you that my business is thriving." For the first time, Halston's smirk faltered. He flipped through the contracts, agreements with nonprofits, schools, and businesses. He saw invoices with numbers that could not be dismissed. He scanned the newspaper clipping, the headline declaring Marcus's company a beacon of hope for underserved neighborhoods. The banker's lips tightened. "So you've managed to scrape together something small. That doesn't mean you're bankable." Marcus's chest rose and fell, but his voice stayed even. "What it means is that your judgment was wrong. You saw me as too broke for a loan. What you failed to see was potential, vision, and determination. And now others see it. Investors outside this bank see it. Communities see it. Clients see it. The only one who didn't was you." Halston bristled. "This is a bank, not a charity. We deal in hard numbers, not community sentiment." Marcus leaned forward. "And yet the numbers are here. Growth, contracts, demand. Everything you require. But when I needed a chance, you gave me contempt. That's not banking. That's bias." Unbeknownst to Halston, the tension had spilled beyond the office walls. The raised voices caught the attention of nearby staff and even some customers waiting in the lobby. People began to gather, their curiosity drawing them closer. The sight of Marcus, poised, articulate, unwavering, standing against the well-dressed banker, sparked whispers. Halston, sensing the eyes on him, straightened. "If you're trying to make a scene, you're wasting everyone's time." Marcus glanced toward the open door where several onlookers stood. "I'm not making a scene. I'm showing the truth. The truth that this bank judged me before even reading my business plan. The truth that your words were meant to crush me, but instead they became the fire that fueled my success." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others whispered. The receptionist, who had once offered Marcus a pitying smile, now looked at him with admiration. Halston's composure cracked. "Enough," he snapped. "This meeting is over," but Marcus didn't move. His voice grew louder, firm, yet dignified. "No, it's not over. Because this isn't about me anymore. It's about every person who's walked into this bank with hope, only to be told they're not enough. It's about the countless dreams you've dismissed because they didn't fit your narrow picture of success." The room fell silent. The power dynamics had shifted, the banker's authority shrinking under the weight of Marcus's words. For the first time, Halston seemed small, his arrogance exposed in front of the very people he sought to impress. One by one, staff and customers began to applaud. It wasn't thunderous at first, just a few claps that grew louder, steadier, until the entire lobby echoed with approval. The sound reverberated through the marble halls, drowning out the banker's feeble protests. Marcus didn't bask in the applause. He simply gathered his documents, stood tall, and looked Halston in the eye. "You told me I was too broke for a loan. But the truth is, you were too blind to see value. And now, the whole world knows it." With that, he turned and walked out, the crowd parting for him like a path of respect. The applause followed him out the glass doors and into the sunlight, where the city's hum felt different, brighter, fuller, alive with possibility. Behind him, Halston remained in his office, his reputation fractured. The man who once wielded his words like a weapon had been publicly unmasked, his cruelty laid bare before his colleagues and clients. For Marcus, the moment wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, about proving that resilience outshines arrogance, that vision outlives prejudice. As he stepped into the open air, he carried not just his documents, but the weight of a victory far greater than any loan could buy. When Marcus stepped out of the bank that day, the applause still echoing in his ears, he didn't carry the pride of humiliating a man. He carried something deeper. The proof that dignity, persistence, and vision could silence even the loudest voices of doubt. The sunlight felt warmer, the air lighter, as if the city itself acknowledged the quiet revolution that had taken place inside those glass walls. In the days that followed, word of the confrontation spread beyond the lobby. Customers recounted the story to friends. Employees whispered about the banker's downfall during lunch breaks. The scene became more than gossip. It became a parable. People shared it online, framing Marcus as the man who stood up not only for himself but for everyone dismissed by arrogance. Marcus's business, already gaining momentum, experienced an unexpected surge. Inquiries poured in from organizations that had never considered working with a small startup before. Contracts multiplied, his services became sought after, and his calendar filled with meetings and opportunities. What began as a humble initiative to serve his neighborhood now stretched across the city, then the region. But Marcus never forgot where it began. He invested his growth back into the community, hiring young people who needed their first chance just as he once had. He opened training programs giving those deemed unqualified the skills and confidence to thrive. For him, success wasn't about building an empire. It was about breaking cycles and building bridges. Meanwhile, the banker's story took a different turn. Richard Halston, once untouchable in his position, faced questions from his superiors. Complaints surfaced, not only Marcus's but echoes from other clients who suddenly felt emboldened to share how they, too, had been dismissed or belittled. What had once been brushed aside as tough banking now looked like discrimination. The bank's reputation took a hit. Articles appeared highlighting the dangers of bias in financial institutions. Public trust wavered, and while Halston remained in his office for a while, the glow of authority had dimmed. Clients avoided him, colleagues whispered about him, and his career, once unshakable, teetered under the weight of his arrogance. For Marcus, watching Halston fall wasn't a source of joy. It was a reminder that the systems stacked against people like him weren't invincible. They could be challenged, exposed, and transformed. The confrontation had been more than personal vindication. It was the spark for a wider conversation. Months later, Marcus was invited to speak at a community event. Standing before a crowd of young entrepreneurs, he told his story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a testament to resilience. He spoke about the day he walked into the bank, full of hope, only to be told he was too broke. He described the sting of humiliation, the nights of doubt, and the turning point where he chose to rise instead of retreat. And then he spoke about the second day, the day he returned, not with begging hands but with proof of his worth, the day he exposed bias for what it was, the day the applause of strangers turned into a movement of belief. The audience listened, their faces lit with recognition. Many had lived versions of his story. Many still feared facing theirs. But Marcus's words gave them a different vision. That rejection wasn't the end. That dignity could transform pain into power. The impact rippled further than he imagined. Young people started businesses with new courage. Community leaders advocated for fairer access to loans and credit. And institutions, watching the public's response, began rethinking their policies, not out of kindness but accountability. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded. He knew success could be fleeting if not anchored in purpose. He remembered the weight of that banker's words, the way they almost crushed him, and he vowed no one under his leadership would be dismissed like that. One afternoon, as he walked past the same bank, he noticed the familiar office through the glass. It was empty now. Halston's nameplate had been removed, his authority erased as quietly as it had once loomed. Marcus paused for a moment, not out of triumph, but reflection. Life had a way of turning tables, but the lesson was clear. Arrogance crumbles, while resilience endures. Years later, when people spoke of Marcus, they didn't talk about the man denied alone. They spoke of the leader who built opportunity from rejection, the man who transformed humiliation into hope, the businessman who proved that worth isn't measured by the narrow standards of a gatekeeper but by the vision that refuses to die. And whenever someone told the story of the banker who sneered, too broke for a loan, it was no longer remembered as an insult. It was remembered as the beginning of Marcus's rise, the spark of a legacy that no amount of money could buy and no amount of arrogance could erase.